Well, hello everybody, my name's Paul Sudnick, and today we're going to be spending some time looking at the TOWS matrix. So let's start by looking at what the TOWS analysis brings to the table. The more attuned of you will have already noticed that TOWS is actually the same acronym as SWOT, but backwards. So we look here at threats, opportunities, weaknesses and strengths, and it combines both the internal and external forces that SWOT provides to come up with some productive ideas of how best to use the information in the original SWOT analysis. The tool is first described by Heinz Weyrich in 1999, and he takes the SWOT analysis one step further and helps to use the information in the SWOT to action the findings that you have from that analysis and turn them into useful to-dos to actually move the strategy that you're designing forward. So the main purpose of a TOWS is to actually reduce the threats, take advantage of the opportunities, remove weaknesses, and go on to exploit strengths as you actually get things done. Let's go back for a moment and look at a SWOT analysis and what it actually is. So the SWOT analysis examines the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats that your organization faces. And the tool has been around for a long time, obviously, and marketers and strategists use this very, very simple planning tool to get a clearer picture of their internal and external environments. The strengths and the weaknesses tell us about our internal environment, and the opportunities and threats tell us about what is going on outside and the situation that the organization faces. So SWOT is really actually very, very useful as an analytical tool. It gathers information, tells us what's going on in the area around us, but it doesn't actually generate any actionable ideas for improvement. And that's where the TOWS approach comes in. So what's the difference then? Because it's the same elements are being used, aren't they? We're just presenting them in other order. So the TOWS uses the same elements as the SWOT analysis, but is aimed at action rather than analysis. And the TOWS is best used as an addition to the analytical perspective that the SWOT tool gives in order to help you to decide what to do with the findings and how best to design strategy going forward. And here we have then the TOWS matrix presented as a 2x2. You see we have the strengths and the weaknesses, the internal perspective across the top of the 2x2. We have the external factors, the opportunities and the threats on the other side of the matrix. And then, interestingly, what the TOWS allows you to do is to blend the S and the O, the W and the O, the S and the T, and the W and the T. And as you blend each of these, then you begin to see that you can, for example, under the S&O perspective, you can generate options that use the strengths to take advantage of the opportunities. And we'll go on to look at this in a little bit more detail later on. But this is the first way in which you can combine the information from your SWOT analysis. So these four strategic groups that come in this 2x2 enable you to answer some of the following questions. The S and the O perspective helps you look at how you can leverage the strengths that you have in order to maximize the benefits and returns from the opportunities in the marketplace. The S and the T perspective shows you how you can sustainably leverage the strengths that you have in order to mitigate the threats in the marketplace. The WO perspective helps you to look at how you can utilize the opportunities within the market to overcome the weaknesses that you've already identified. And the WT perspective helps you to look at how you can mitigate threats within the marketplace and reduce the impact of the weaknesses that you've identified. So you're taking the material from your SWOT and you're basically bringing elements of it together into the four combinations that become possible. And now you're not just saying, well, this is the situation that comes from analysis in terms of our strengths, and this is the situation in terms of our weaknesses that comes from analysis. You're bouncing each of these analytical perspectives off against each other. And as you're doing that, you're providing a perspective onto future actions. What can we do that is positive that is actually going to move us forward and help to get things done. So we can actually look at the elements of the TOWS matrix in this kind of diagram, where again you've got the weaknesses and strengths on the top and the opportunities and threats down the side, and we combine now the WT, which we might call a mini strategy because we're trying to minimize weaknesses whilst avoiding and minimizing threats. The ST perspective, we might call that a maxi-mini because we're trying to maximize the use of our strengths and avoid or minimize the threats. Whilst down here in the left-hand corner, we have the WO perspective, which we might call the mini-maxi set of strategies, because here we're trying to maximize opportunities whilst overcoming weaknesses and minimizing them. And then, of course, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have the maxi strategies, where we try to maximize our strengths, use our strengths to their maximum in order to maximize the opportunities that we see. None of these four perspectives is good, better, best. They all provide a particular insight, which is positive, because if we take the top left-hand corner here, WT, you've got weaknesses, you want to minimize them, right? If you've got threats, you want to avoid them, right? So the perspective that WT brings is not better or worse than the perspective that SO brings in terms of maxi strategies. It's just dealing with the elements of the original SWOT. So an overall useful use of the TOWS matrix would generate strategies in each one of these four quadrants in order to minimize weaknesses, minimize threats, maximize opportunities, overcome weaknesses, maximize strengths, minimize threats, and to use strengths to maximize opportunities. So a couple of examples of how we can operationalize this analysis. If we look at the SO perspective, so using strengths to maximize opportunities, a strength might be that we already have a good distribution network. An opportunity might be that we want to increase market share and we feel that there's an opportunity for us to do so. So the strategy that might emerge from that might be to utilize existing distribution channels, which we have and which are good, to increase the availability of products, for example, through next day delivery, which would result in the increase of market share. If we look at the S&T perspective, so to use strengths to reduce threats, we might be excellent at co-creating with customers, and that's a strength very clearly. And the threat, though, that we face might be that there are skill gaps within the market. We recognize that, we want to reduce that threat, and the strategy that we come up with might see us integrate co-creation deeper within the company in order to bridge this skills gaps. So you see how slowly we're beginning to recognize the status that we are in at the moment and looking at how we can change that status going forward by pursuing a particular strategy. Let's look at the other two perspectives that remain in the TOWS matrix approach. If we look at WO, we might want to reduce weaknesses in order to develop opportunities, and a weakness might be that we recognize that we're not very good at upselling or cross-selling. And the opportunity that we've recognized already is that we want to increase market share. We want to do that. We see that there's an opportunity to do it, but our weakness in upselling and cross-selling is stopping us from doing that. So the strategy might well be to focus on compatible products and services to complement our existing range, and so make that upselling and cross-selling part of the day-to-day sales process that is very, very close to what we already do, thus reducing the weakness and giving us the opportunity to increase our market share. The final example then, let's look at the WT perspective, where we want to avoid threats by reducing weaknesses. Our weakness might be that we know we have a poorly implemented customer relationship management strategy. We're not very good at CRM. We know we want to be better, but the main thing at the moment is to reduce our exposure to that weakness. The threat that we see is that we have limited brand awareness. So looking at those two situations that we face, a potential strategy might be to focus on reliable data that would enhance the awareness within an existing market. And by doing that, we'd avoid the weaknesses and we'd also reduce the threat because we'd be taking positive action to actually sidestep it. So what we've tried to do here is to bring together the analytical outcomes of a SWOT exercise and begin to combine the elements of the SWOT in order to come up with actionable potential strategies by taking the 4 perspectives that the TOWS approach offers us. And you will remember this slide that gives us perhaps the best view on what TOWS actually comprises and how best it can be introduced into your development of strategy for your project.